This is 2020.
We've all known children who, for some reason, seem troublesome in school and at home and incapable of settling down or focusing on one thing. And I think because you probably know adults with the same kinds of problems who are now accused of never listening or following through. Well, what you and others may perceive as laziness or indifference could be something else entirely. A brain disorder, once seen as only in children, but now recognized in adults as well. We're bringing you this story again because, as Catherine Pryor reports, there is a treatment, and it can change people's lives dramatically and overnight.
Peter Homans is a businessman, a money manager, a composer, a family man. His attention constantly bounces from one thing to another as he moves through life at a frantic pace. It's a feeling captured in the unusual music he composes.
You'll have the clarinet playing along, and all of a sudden these, marimbas and vibraphones come out of the bottom, and all of a sudden the trumpets come out. It's kind of overflowing, and that's the way I experience life.
But for Peter, this frenetic life of constant movement is not by choice. Instead, it's what he's literally driven to do by something called attention deficit disorder, a biological disorder of the brain that affects millions of American adults.
This disorder was first diagnosed in children over 50 years ago and came to be known as hyperactivity because that was the most obvious symptom. Years later, it was renamed attention deficit disorder, ADD, when experts found there were other symptoms, such as a tendency to be impulsive, or terrible problems concentrating or paying attention. But for years, ADD was only diagnosed in children because no one thought to look for it in adults.
Can I have one, sir?
But it is now known that at least half of the children who have ADD never outgrow it, and its untreated symptoms can plague their adult lives.
I've had the experience where I can be talking to someone like you, and your mouth is moving, and I'm literally not hearing you. Randomly, something on the order of 30 or 40% of the time, I will lose all focus altogether. Hey, can you say Cincinnati? Can you say?
These lapses in attention have frustrated Peter his entire life. In school, he showed very high intelligence, but periodically, without any warning, he couldn't function at all.
I'd read the same thing 35 times. None of it would ever sink in. I couldn't concentrate on anything. My mother thought I was doing drugs, but I wasn't doing drugs. I mean, and the school thought I was doing drugs. But I just completely lost concentration.
Doctor, what sort of things do these children tend to hear?
According to ADD expert Dr. Ned Hallowell, without a proper diagnosis, parents and teachers can become frustrated and even angry with such a child's behavior.
Typically, they're told they're stubborn, they're lazy, they're willful, they're stupid, they're underachievers. As they get older, the teacher comments become very moralistic, your life is in your hands, if only you would try harder, if only you would buckle down.
I just thought I was, damaged, or not very bright, or something. I mean,
Now, you knew you were bright. You knew that.
But I didn't, because if I was bright, why would I be incapable of doing these things? And what discovering ADD did for me was it said, hey, listen, there is a reason for this. And it's just a chemical thing. It's like a switch that goes on and off.
So she would be here 30 minutes.
Before the discovery of a biological basis for ADD, the disorder was blamed on everything from bad parenting to food additives. Dr. Alan Zemetkin's research at the National Institutes of Health changed all that.
We study the patients using parts of the brain that are important for paying attention. Energy metabolism.
Dr. Zemetkin discovered that the ADD brain is less active than the normal brain, as you can see in these computerized PET scan pictures, where red and white shows more activity in the normal brain, and green and blue shows less activity in the ADD brain. So the ADD brain can't do its job of focusing attention or controlling physical or emotional impulses. Researchers also learned that ADD can be genetic. And now many adults are discovering their own ADD through their children.
Hi. Hi. Did you have a nice day?
Yes.
Good.
She started actually verbalizing, I have a hard time paying attention. When I'm reading a book, I can't remember at the end of the page what I've read. When I'm watching a movie, I can't remember at the beginning of the movie at the end what happened in the beginning.
Hannah Oresti was determined to discover the reasons why her daughter had difficulty concentrating. At school, there was no hyperactivity to suggest ADD, so the teachers just assumed Devorah wasn't as bright as the other children.
One of my teachers, she put me in the lowest reading group, and I came home crying, saying, like, she doesn't know how smart I am.
Hannah refused to accept the school's assessment and didn't give up until finding the proper diagnosis, attention deficit disorder.
The first thing I did was I got out a book and read what it was. And the first article I read described her to a T. Yeah. And I read this article and I sat there thinking, this is me.
There are probably 10 to 15 million adults in the United States today who have attention deficit disorder and don't know it.
For people like Hannah, it just becomes a way of life. And if they go for help, most therapists fail to recognize adult ADD and don't know how to diagnose or treat it. There are no definitive psychological tests, and the brain PET scanning is only useful for research. So a diagnosis of adult ADD must be made by getting to know the person and understanding their history.
And so what I look for in the history is the sense of underachievement, trouble with organization and disorganization, often trouble with mood regulation, tendency chronically to procrastinate, this sort of low-level chronic anxiety that the world might fall apart at any moment because they just can't attend to everything all at once.
Isn't everybody like this to some extent?
Just because everyone can identify with it somewhat, that does not mean that everyone has it. In order to have the diagnosis of ADD, you must have these symptoms intensely and for a long time.
Dr. Hallowell evaluated Hannah and found the critical factor in making a correct diagnosis of ADD. Her symptoms had been present since childhood. Finding the right medication and the right dose was the next challenge. When she did, the relief it gave her was striking.
It was actually like, you know, when your TV has snow on it and you need to tune it in. That's in essence what it was like. Having that feeling of fuzziness, but then all of a sudden somebody tuned it in.
Suddenly things are clear. And that is the experience people get when they get treatment for their ADD. They'd been living with this confusion without knowing what it was.
Because ADD often runs in families, Hannah had her son Eli tested when he showed problems with attention. Eli has a wonderful way of explaining just how much his medication helps him.
Like a day ago, I took my medicine too early, and for an hour in school I couldn't pay attention. So it's like being the richest man in the world and then dropping to broke. So
ADD is not all bad news. In fact, with proper diagnosis and treatment, there can be some interesting benefits. For example, people with ADD are often drawn toward creative endeavors and situations that require spontaneity. Eli saw our camera and found a way to make one of his own.
So you can take a picture of that camera right there, can't you?
Oh, there are my drums.
Once Peter Homans was diagnosed and treated for ADD, his passion for composing music returned.
Cool, huh?
There's no correlation between ADD and intelligence. In fact, many people with ADD are very smart, very creative. I think that part of the brain that has to do with regulating impulse control and attention is altered in such a way that more possibilities are entertained. What is creativity but impulsivity gone right?
Just as discovering ADD can open up a life, living with it undiscovered can destroy one.
Now. Get in now. Hadley?
For Bill Garnett, his undiagnosed ADD was hurting everyone he loved and turning life at home and at work into a nightmare.
When I would enter the office, I always looked at it as a war zone. It's just too much pressure for me, so I would just immediately run into my office and close the door because nobody could bother me. I always felt like I had everything up in the air, nothing getting done. I would start a lot of different projects, but never finish one.
In ADD, everything seems to be happening all at once. And that's why prioritizing is so difficult. That's why it's hard to decide what to do first.
I couldn't deal with it.
Sounds like you were overwhelmed.
Overwhelmed. My employees gave me a T-shirt that said, "Leave me alone." By the time I came home at night, I was gone, done. And when if any problem presented itself at home at that point, forget it. I was off the wall.
So what had once been a wonderful courtship had quickly become a troubled marriage. Bill was fine at the beginning when things were simple, but with the complexities of family life, he became scattered.
He didn't seem to be very focused on me anymore. The simple conversations, he wouldn't even hear everything that I said. It's like he was always somewhere else.
What did you think when Mary tried to get your attention or tried to get you to focus on something?
I thought she was telling me what to do. And then I would be off into a zone. Mary's response was, you don't even care enough about me to have a conversation with me.
He seemed so burdened, and I could never figure out what it was.
And basically, I had the attitude, well, geez, I can't do anything right. We got married to live like this. I said, this is crazy. I said, I'm not happy.
Did you agree, Mary?
Oh, absolutely.
Was there ever a time the two of you thought the marriage couldn't be maintained?
Absolutely. Several times.
But really, these last few months, it just...
Several times.
Mary and Bill were at the breaking point, and neither understood why their marriage was failing.
And if we didn't have the situation with my son, I would have never even started to think about what the reasons could be.
What was the situation with your son?
My son Bradford was tested, and they diagnosed him with an attention deficit disorder.
When the doctor explained Bradford's disruptive behavior, Bill recognized himself, both as a child and an adult. And then came the question that changed Bill's life.
So the doctor turned to Bill and he said, well, have you ever considered that you might have ADD?
After a careful evaluation and diagnosis, Bill began treatment.
The first day of Ritalin was, that was unique. That Friday I was able to go to work. I solved problems in the morning, solved problems in the afternoon. I still had time left over in the day. And it was like everything was measured. There was a sense of order that all of a sudden
Armin, how are you?
Came to light. And I got home at night and sitting down, and I actually sat with the kids. And they were near me. We were watching TV, and Mary came in, and we were talking, and I was just calm.
It's very emotional. I'm thinking, my goodness, it's like we have been released. We've been freed. We have a totally new lease on life, and we like each other. It's unbelievable. It's our way out.
How is the research going now, Catherine?
Well, we talked to Dr. Hollowell, who, since the piece aired, has co-authored a book called Driven to Distraction. And he said, in fact, they're working on a biological diagnostic test that would use brain scanning to determine whether or not you have ADD. And also they're looking for the genetic link.
Yeah, right. You know, here's a question. Should everyone be pulled away from shifting of attention?
Well, it's interesting. There are people, somewhat like Peter Homans in the piece, that say, wait a minute, we enjoy our lives going 15 different directions at once. So the question is it a problem for you? And if so, maybe you need therapy. But Dr. Hollowell also added, be careful, because the symptoms are a bit vague, misdiagnosis is possible, and also if it becomes too popular, then people could be exploiting it for profit.
Thank you, Catherine.